Hey people, today join me on a journey. I'm very pleased to introduce Nick Cook, former aviation editor of Jane's Defence Weekly, and me, former BBC film editor at Specialist Factual. Both of us have transitioned into the fact today that we believe or know that UAP, the highly strange phenomenon, are a global thing. We're not alone here on planet Earth. Non-human intelligence does live on this planet and people see it. But back in the day, when we both worked for legacy media, you wouldn't touch that subject with a barge pole. What has it been like for both of us to go from legacy media to today discussing UAP and consciousness? It's a giant leap and a very interesting journey.
Hey, everybody, look who we've got. Nick's back, obviously the former aviation editor of Jane's Defence Weekly. But today we're going to talk about something really interesting. We are both from legacy media. Would you agree, Nick? When you worked for Jane's and other publications, did you and those papers ever go down the UFO UAP route?
Most certainly not, because I would have been chastised so badly. In fact, I'd have been thrown out on my ear if I'd dared breathe the word UFO or even worse, flying saucer.
Yeah, and that's exactly my story. At the time, we were roughly the same age. I was working at the BBC, Specialist Factual, doing history and science films. And however tempting it would be to suggest a flying saucer story, as they were called, there's no way that the BBC would ever touch them. But I mean, media today are all over the UAP phenomenon. So what happened? Tell me about your journey into this discovery about, revealing that maybe there's more out there than legacy media would actually talk about.
So I was dragged into it kind of reluctantly, kicking and screaming, in the sense that Jane's would get quite a lot of inquiries from people who would see stuff in the sky and write into us because we were noted for being, the experts in matters of aviation and military stuff. So, and being the aviation guy for Jane's Defence Weekly, quite a lot of this stuff would end up on my desk. It would be, I mean, we kind of used to unkindly joke about it, but this was back in the 1980s.
Right.
And, we go, oh God, there's been another request from someone to explain why they saw a pink blob at the end of their garden, above the garden shed kind of thing.
Sure.
And I have to say, again, because it was of the time, that those requests were very largely, well, by and large, almost exclusively, I would have thought, chucked into the bin, straight into the waste paper basket.
Right.
Because in our organization, I mean, you talk about legacy media, Simon. I mean, in a sense, we couldn't have been more legacy because, there was nothing populist about Jane's. It was a very serious organization. Its roots went back 100 years, and it was all about data and facts. And so, you can imagine anything UFO-like just didn't fit into that bailiwick at all.
No, the same with the BBC. I mean, although magazine formats like Tomorrow's World would cover hundreds of different stories, they certainly wouldn't cover anything. They did. I mean, they were interested in military technology. There's a few stories. I remember working on a film about HARP, ionospheric heating, but it was not woo-woo at all. It was very downplaying anything. It was, interviews with the director saying, it's just a research station. Oh yeah, right. They just wouldn't go down anything which was strange.
Yeah, and vice versa. The slight door opening, the door being pushed ajar in our case, my case, was that there was, as you say, a crossover between highly classified aircraft shapes, things that were being tested in secret, particularly in the 1980s, but also in the 1990s, and and UFOs. That there was this sort of blurred
Right.
line between the two. I actually did a couple of feature length docs on that,
You
documentaries.
did. Hmm.
Billion Dollar Secret back in the late 1990s
Right.
was the first of them, and it looked specifically at that. But I have to say that was very much a off the cuff venture, and I had to kind of clear it with my editors that they were happy for me to do that because of the heretical nature of the subject matter,
Right.
the crossover with the UAP stuff.
Right.
But as you and I know, the CIA and other intelligence agencies have used UFOs over the decades to hide secret stuff behind.
Totally.
That's sort of reluctantly how I kind of got drawn into at least looking at the subject matter. But it was, to begin with, it was deeply reluctant.
So who made the $1 billion Secret? Was that it was a Channel 4 program by an independent production company?
No, it was actually, believe it or not, Channel 5 back in the day.
Oh yeah, sure.
One of their early length features, and co-produced with the Discovery Channel.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah.
In that film, which everybody should go and watch, there's a link to it. It's very good. The young Nick and the young Simon of the day. Well, no, I wasn't in it, but whatever. You get the impression as a viewer that you have a bit of an eye opener. Was that true during the production? That something you met
Yeah.
witnesses and things?
Oh, completely. I was on. It was a complete eye opener for me, and I'm slightly ashamed to say some of it I sort of dismissed because it was too eye opening, even on that journey. But we spent a great deal of time in the southwestern United States.
Right.
An area that has some secret and secretive bases like Area 51 and Edwards Air Force Base, for that matter. And people would see stuff in and around, over and around those bases. And that was the purpose of the doc, really, was to look at them.
Mhm.
But slightly further afield, I remember there were instances where we interviewed the local farming community in southern Colorado, where they were seeing stuff that was silent. These were things that were hovering, sometimes just a few tens of feet above them, and they were reporting totally silent, no noise coming from these things at all. And these guys, living and working off the land, were very down to earth.
Mhm.
And I really struggled. I had a lot of dissonance, or rather, I was struggling with my dissonance,
Right.
because here were people who, as I say, were very down to earth, reporting stuff that was out of this world. And I was really struggling to to rationalize those two things.
Yeah, including instances of cattle mutilation and all kinds of stuff that was going on in Colorado and all over. Uh, were you continually thinking it was a secret project? The people are seeing things that they shouldn't be seeing, or was it really man-made?
Well, to begin with, I mean, that was my working assumption, was that this was all secret tech.
Right.
And it sort of merged with stories like, black helicopters, which, as any UFO buff will know, sort of comes with the territory, these weird black unmarked helicopters seen flying around zones of flying saucer sightings. To begin with, I'm thinking, I'm going to nail this one. It's going to have a very prosaic, or not prosaic, but a rational explanation. But the deeper I went into that territory, as you mentioned, the cattle mutilations, which came with those silent, silent saucer sightings by these farmers, it began to rapidly run away from me. And I remember feeling quite sort of disoriented, actually, in southern Colorado, where these very sane and rational people were talking about these sightings. And eventually, I think, as we talked on the last time you and I had a conversation, when we were talking about Aurora.
Yeah.
In the middle of all of that, I had to jump on a plane from some tiny little town in southern Colorado to fly to the Pentagon, where I interviewed General George Mullner about black programs, which again was a really weird transition for me. I was going from sort of ranch land suddenly into the Pentagon. And I asked George Mullner, I said, look, I've just come from southern Colorado where people are reporting all of these strange things. And are you responsible for them as the head of Air Force Research and Development? And he sort of joked and laughed a bit, and there was a bit of sort of nodding and winking. But he basically said, no, we aren't responsible for those things. Whereas we might be responsible for some stuff, but we're not responsible for that. And then he quipped, but you know what? Whoever's making those things, I'd love to put them under contract because we'd love that capability ourselves. So, go for it.
No, he was probably being very honest. I mean, as you say, the DOD, MOD, or whoever nations have used flying saucers as a cover story, but it sounds like he didn't know what was really going on. So you met people who had seen stuff, and and it affected you. It shook your core. And this was from witness statements.
It challenged my worldview, certainly. And the moment, that's of course interesting psychologically. I bet you at Horizon and Time Watch would have done some programs about the brain, the mind, what we accept, what we don't. And I found my worldview challenged by that, and slowly I think it began to erode all these sort of monolithic ideas about the world that I'd built up over a decade or three. And it was challenging, but I needed to keep one foot at least very firmly planted in the ground when I was covering this stuff.
I'm sure. I mean, it's interesting for me. I think one of the most honest and revealing pieces of official data probably came from the MOD Condign report, which was written as an internal lookup document when the supposed UFO desk was shut. So ministerial questions could be referenced to pieces of a scientific data. And in the Condign report, it basically, it's a bit of a joke, but it says 80% of what people see are prosaic everyday objects that they just are misidentified, Ryanair or whatever. And 20% are ours. We know what they are and we can't tell you, and the rest are aliens. So that was their internal joke. But
Condign says something else that's very interesting, because in amongst all of that, which it may or may not have been an attempt by whoever wrote it, and I can't remember quite now who did.
Ron Haddo. Yeah, right.
Yes, that's right, Ron Haddo. So I don't know whether it was his intention or not to sideline the whole issue, even within obviously the Ministry of Defense. But what he actually says is that a lot of the sightings can be put down to natural plasmas, like ball lightning and stuff. Well, actually plasma is now coming up, ironically, as a very interesting area of study for UAP. So I actually think that Condign unwittingly put its finger on the pulse 3 decades ago, when actually it didn't really mean to. So it sort of it makes very interesting reading if you now go back and read Condign in that
in many, it's big, it's long, and people often pull up the first page or read the conclusions, but it's 3 or 4 studies long, and it's worth getting. You can download it from the National Archive and read the whole thing. It's dry, but it's very interesting. And as you say, Haddo wanted to come up with some kind of explanation that might be relevant, and he worked with a lot of people who are looking at natural phenomenon, the kind of Earth lights people, and looking at plasma, And then the whole plasma thing, as you say, it's just fascinating because Britain's always had a kind of a history of looking at directed energy weapons, going way back. And yeah, what plasma seems to be. And then today, the relationship between plasma and consciousness is plasma conscious. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. That's the kind of world that Nick and I are in today, when we're being really out there and looking at possibilities. But yeah, go and read the Condign report. The Condign report for me is also my key into accepting that something was real, when Nick Pope revealed to me that it had officially admitted that the Bentwaters Woodbridge Rendlesham Forest incident occurred. It wasn't a figment of somebody's imagination. It wasn't a cover story, but people were injured. And then for me, speaking to the injured US Air Force personnel who had physical injuries caused by highly strange phenomenon, or whatever, it might be human, but whatever it was that caused it, suddenly it was no longer a pink thing at the end of the garden. Here were people actually injured, and the Condign report confirmed it. And in fact, the Condign report was used to help secure injury and service settlements for the US Air Force people who were injured, because the DoD denied it all for some reason. And it was only when Condign was declassified, that was great. That there's a section on it on Woodbridge and Bentwaters. So suddenly, for me, it became very real.
Well, and that still, for me, is the interesting sort of area of study here, which is where you get a crossover between stuff that is or appears to be out of this world,
Right.
and real world stuff. So my early experience of that, taking us back to our time zone of interest, which was sort of the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
was when I first visited Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. Kirtland is the center of excellence for Air Force studies into directed energy weaponry. I think I'm right in saying that the first drone ever to be shot out of the sky by a laser was shot down over Kirtland on a test range there in 1973.
Ooh, right.
The history of directed energy weapons goes back a long, long time. I first went there in 1992, and I was taken on some pretty extensive sort of visits there, and also briefings by the Air Force Research Laboratory, which is headquartered at Kirtland. They take me I requested a briefing on something called Shiva Star, which was a giant capacitor bank.
Oh, yeah.
Which would hold and store 10 trillion watts of energy,
Right.
which I think was 3.5 times more than the US national grid
Right.
in a year, just to sort of give it a sense of proportion.
Yep.
Anyway, the idea was you release this energy in a bolt of plasma from a plasma gun, and you fire it at an orbiting satellite or something.
Right.
Fascinating. For me, this was sort of my bread and butter. I took down all the notes. I went there and they said, "Oh, we're gonna do a test shot in a couple of years' time. We're gearing up to it. It's all very exciting." Blah blah blah. I returned there a couple of years later, and it's like I go to the same place where it was, and there's like tumbleweed blowing through the building, and I go, "What happened to that very interesting Shiva Star program?" And literally somebody goes, "What Shiva Star program?"
Oh, wow.
And after a few more questions, I go, "Okay, I get it. Right, nothing to see here. Move on."
Move on, Nick.
Black program.
Right.
Black, very simply, went secret. So that for me is where things get really, really interesting.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, the more I dug into the more man-made aspects of Rendlesham, that's so interesting. You mentioned high energy power, because Cobra Mist probably had these things called Marx generators, which was the same megawatts of storage to be released as a pulse, probably to make non-nuclear EMP effects during the Cold War to knock out an invading Soviet army's communication and engines, I suppose. That's probably what Cobramist was experimenting with. But the same pulse idea of storing vast amounts of power. Plus Kirtland, I went to Sandia and I went to Kirtland in Albuquerque, and they showed me around Trestle. Trestle was a wooden trestle, but named after a trestle bridge that was big enough to put a B-52 on to check it for EMP pulse. And that had the Marx generators to build up the energy levels and release it as a pulse. Did you see Trestle?
I did. In fact,
Yeah.
when you mentioned it, I was never shown it in the way that you were, but of course you can't miss it when you come onto the Kirtland.
No, you fly
site.
in and you see it. Right.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting stuff goes on and went on there. In fact, actually, people talk about Area 51.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Los Alamos actually as well on the same trip. So those get a lot of attention.
Right.
But popularly, Kirtland does not get
Right.
that level of attention. And I suspect strongly that suits it no end.
I'm absolutely sure. What's your view? I mean, a lot of the UFO community and this kind of disclosure thing going on in the United States is looking at what Pentagon and DoD are doing. But I keep on hearing that Department of Energy are much more involved in advanced physics and even out off this world physics. Have you got any insight into the Department of Energy?
No particular insight into
Right.
it, Simon, except that, as has been well reported, I think the DOE, the Department of Energy,
Right.
is not subject to the same reporting and disclosure rules and freedom of information access rules
Right.
that the DoD is. So when we talk, or when people talk about crash retrieved saucer artifacts, UFO artifacts that have been spirited into the US Defense Industrial Base,
Right.
there were two places allegedly where you'd want to put them so that they would never be discovered through a Freedom of Information Act search. One is the DOE, or the Atomic Energy Commission, as it was.
Right.
And the second is into industry itself. So hence why you hear places like Lockheed Martin were repositories for these sort of crash retrieved artifacts.
Yeah, I remember working and being also at the BBC on Panorama and things at the Tony Blair era when Blair was introducing the British version of the Freedom of Information, and I remember doing a story where that covered that he went to the United States and was told, move the flying saucers into BAE systems because it's outside of freedom of information as a joke. But I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Well, who knows? Wharton, BAE Systems, Wharton plant in Lancashire, which I used to visit a lot as a defence journalist, and no doubt, perhaps you did too. Did you ever go to Wharton?
No. I'm a film editor, so I'm a mushroom. I'm kept in the dark and and things are put on top of me. But I'd love to go to Wharton. No.
Well,
what did you see, Nick?
Well, it was an interesting place. It was particularly interesting, again, in our time zone of interest in the mid-90s, because that's when BAE and the UK began to get interested in stealth, or rather, actually, its interest in stealth began to manifest. So I went up to Wharton for a briefing at BAE while I was with Jane's Defence Weekly, and I was expecting something relatively prosaic, and they suddenly sat me down and said, "Now we're going to tell you about our stealth program." And I went,
yes, please do.
That's interesting. I didn't. Well, I did know that you had one, Britain's connection to stealth is very interesting, and it's little known.
Mm.
But and it actually it involved untangling a real mystery for me. And I think we went into some of it last time, about that row of stealth fighters at a Saudi Arabian airbase
Right.
with an RAF squadron leader's name stenciled on one of the cockpits. But that connection, and obviously that was during the first Gulf War in 1991, but that goes back decades. And that actually was our entry ticket into secret American stuff. Because back in the 1950s, we did a lot of stealth investigation.
Right.
But we, as in the RAF, decided that we would be a low-level penetration force if it came to a war with the Soviet Union.
Right.
The Americans decided they were a medium altitude or high altitude bombing force, where, of course, stealth is advantageous. You can't hide up there. You need stealth. So we gave them all of our stealth stuff back in the 60s.
That's a great story.
It's a great story. And
great.
I uncovered that through that one squadron leader's name stenciled on the side of that stealth fighter. Because I went to the MOD, and after a lot of digging in industry, talking to people and coercion of sorts, encouragement, let's say.
Yeah.
The MOD finally came clean and said, yeah, actually, we the UK gave this stuff to the Americans because we didn't have any need of it. And
this stuff, again, we mentioned Ron Evans, a BAE person who did Project Greenclow. Ron says, and has pointed me in the direction of this stuff being metamaterial. I mean, a way of actually building and shape of aircraft and skin or coating material which doesn't absorb but refracts microwave energy. Would you think that's right?
Well, yes and no. I think, the term metamaterial, as I understand it today, it probably does have that connotation from then. But certainly today, you're looking at a material that can engineer at the nanoscale. I mean, it's,
Sure.
it is, and you're talking about channeling electromagnetic energy into waveguides within the material that, as you say, dissipate the energy, send it somewhere else, and then make it stealthy.
Yeah.
And as you told me, I think the last time we were talking, you can do that with optical waves as well through
Imperial College. Yeah, that's now
like a Harry Potter invisibility cloak. You can just make the tab invisible. Right. But certainly as it was applied as a term, if it was applied as a term back then, it would have been much more for, the thing I think we also discussed last time, which was RAM, radar absorbent material.
Yeah.
Which was like a sort of rubberized coating filled with metallic filings. Yeah. Which would scatter radar energy. But again, all of this was really secret stuff. A lot of it remains highly secret. How the recipe that you cook up for stealth is extremely secret. I mean, the first time I was briefed on the stealth fighter and the RAF's involvement in it was at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, and I was told, as I wobbled on a gantry beside the cockpit, that if I touched the skin of the aircraft, they would shoot me. So it was that secret because they were worried I'd get a scooping of the radar absorbent material under my fingernail, have it analyzed.
Of course you would.
Of course I would, absolutely.
Oh, great.
It was all good stuff, but of course, all hidden, as we now know, behind the UFO flying saucer mystery.
Well, right, but this is really interesting. So we're both reverting to, I know this secret craft and I know this special material and advanced physics going on. But all the time, there was a community of people with the highly strange. And so how did you start interfacing with experiences and the phenomenon and consciousness and all of that? I mean, what changed in your mind, Nick? How did that happen?
So I wrote a book I researched the book in the 1990s. It came out in 2001. It was called The Hunt for Zero Point. And it was my
I,
quest to find out whether the US had cracked a whole new propulsion paradigm, basically to come up with a UFO. So I was, my idea was, well, if I can prove that they did that, at least I can now,
right.
take that off the board as an explanation, possibly for UFOs. At the end of that quest, which took me into some incredibly interesting territory, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
I remained pretty convinced that the US had. I knew that it had spent a great deal of time investigating anti-gravity. I wasn't 100% sure it had cracked it. I was pretty sure that it had, but there was then a whole plethora of other sightings
yeah.
that basically could not be explained by any of that. And that fell much more into another bucket entirely, which was the consciousness domain, which is
Yes.
how do we perceive reality?
Totally.
Which for me is a much more interesting question, actually, than the UFO question.
Yeah.
As interesting as that is. It's, can, first of all, do we know what reality is? Well, we have a definition of it, but actually many people would contest that we understand the basis of reality, the material reality that we see, the tree outside my window. The more I delve into the realm of consciousness, seems to just be a projection born of mind, of projected by consciousness, whatever that is, or however it is caused, onto a sort of reality interface that I interpret as being solid matter.
As fact and solid, yeah. I mean, yeah, as we know. I mean, yeah, look at physics, going back to the gold foil experiment where, atoms were 99% not there. The great quote, it was hitting the center of an atom was like you would have to be as lucky as shooting a fly in the cathedral, was the class. And that that completely changed the worldview. I mean, we don't live in a solid meatball plum pudding atom world. We live in a world of nothing, of energy, of forces, and our incredible limited human senses, however much we might enjoy them, keep us anchored in this reality. Oh, so yeah, Nick, that's exactly what's happened to me. The question of consciousness and its interface with physics, I think, is the most interesting question, and I think it begins to explain perception of UAP, the highly strange poking through into our notion of what we call reality seems to be maybe one possible explanation. Do you think maybe that's a good direction to look at? Consciousness, UAPs?
Well, it was for me because I'd exhausted the other trails. I mean, I'm not saying that I didn't look under every stone. There are many more I could have looked under, but I knew that I had to completely change direction in order to begin to understand, actually the nature of reality, really. Right. And for me, it's we know, if you've come up through a sort of science and engineering sort of background as you and I have, that outlier phenomena are the ones you want to look at.
Sure.
If you're interested in how paradigms change.
Right.
Darwin did it when he saw variations in finches on different islands in the Pacific.
Sure.
Einstein realized that, Mercury not being in its position behind the sun gave him the idea about general relativity
Best.
and all of that. So
Brilliant.
those were anomalies. They were outlier phenomena that
Sure.
yielded whole new paradigm, changes, shifts in our understanding of science. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we look at outlier phenomena currently on our screen of perception? And of course, that is what a UFO is. It is an anomalous phenomenon on my screen of perception.
It's almost as if the human brain, when I've talked to people who have seen things or experienced phenomenon, it's the human brain has great difficulty in processing it. I mean, the classic story, because there's so many good stories from the Rendlesham Forest incident, is two people standing next to each other, seeing the same thing, describe different events. It's as if individual consciousness processes something that is really strange that can't be described by fitting it into our building blocks in our brain, starts describing it in different ways.
Totally. And there are even photographs, well, alleged photographs that bear that same point out.
Really?
One of them submitted by the great ufologist Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
There is a picture taken by someone in a car. They pointed the camera up through, I think it was through the clear sunshine roof of the car, at a star-shaped flying source, UFO.
Right.
That's not what anyone in the car saw. They saw a completely different object.
Ah.
And so even when it comes down to a solid thing, as far as we can tell, a solid thing like a photograph, that does
Right.
not comport necessarily with what the eye sees.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That the lens and film recording or digital recording of a camera would perceive its reality in a different way. And that starts to suddenly start making sense. I often wonder when people see things and it's aluminum and it's got portholes and it's got legs, that's really what they've seen is something very strange. And that's how they've compartmentalized and rationalized, the very highly strange phenomenon that they've obviously encountered is that they've kind of described it in prosaic normal terms.
Well, and there is that, but there is a stranger phenomenon that bears some looking at,
Yeah.
which I've done a little bit of looking at, which is if the screen of our perception is a malleable thing, and consciousness basically is the light in the projector that projects stuff onto this screen.
I like it.
Then what we see on our screen of perception is in some respects a reflection of us. What's in our
Mm-hmm.
in our minds. So when you get a saucer or UFO sighting, many of them describe shape-shifting aspects to them.
Yeah.
As if reality, quotes, is morphing and bending to comport with the imagery that we hold in our minds when we see something anomalous in the skies, which actually also perhaps links in with the whole plasma thing, because here's the strangest thing I didn't know until relatively recently, or rather it had been brought to my attention that we live in this electric universe, which is 99.99 recurring percent plasma. And that is something that is not widely discussed, even in the halls of academia. I suspect because it conflicts with the established cosmology of the universe, which is Big Bang Theory, which does not support that scientific worldview. So there are many anomalies out there, Simon, and but it sounds like your journey and mine have been somewhat similar in that there I was decades ago, remotely interested in UFOs because they just conflicted with everything that I'd been taught to believe was real.
Right.
Now I am, as many other people are, deeply interested in the phenomenon because I think it says a whole lot about us, actually. And that's the really interesting thing about them.
I completely agree. I think we've lived, we currently live in a very interesting time when we're starting looking at the kind of biology and physics of consciousness with Roger Penrose and Hameroff and all microtubules and all. Maybe that's early days, but fantastic research. And as you say, I was contacted by somebody this morning who said this mind-blowing thing. He said, Simon, did you know that consciousness is far more stable, a plane of reality, than our perception? You can alter reality by entering a conscious state and changing your future. But what you can't do is use your reality that you perceive to change the conscious plane. I went, oh, that's quite deep, but there's something definitely there. There's something going on. I think we live in really interesting times. Nick, thank you. I think we're very lucky to have come up through legacy media into this eye-opening world of possibilities.
I agree. I consider myself very fortunate to have come up through that world. Probably same for you. I was trained by mentors who were amazing. I mean, just that aspect of my early career was fantastic. Just having these mentors who would show me the ropes. So yeah, I consider myself incredibly lucky to have grown up career-wise through that period.
And you've written some fantastic books, link in the description to Nick as the author. And you continue today with Substack and other journalistic, very interesting articles, which, again, there's a link so you can read what Nick's up to today. And I think, viewers, I think you might see us as a couple of old fogies. But as Nick said, I think we've lived through that transition from it's not real to what the hell's going on to it is real. And I think that might be interesting to you more younger people who might just accept it all. I think you need to keep an open mind and realize that we live in really interesting times. So thank you, Nick, for joining me today. That was great. There's lots more to talk about.
Looking forward to the next time.
All right. Bye.
Cheers, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Nick, that was a really interesting journey that both of us have been on, going from legacy media to a time where we now are discussing openly the interface of consciousness with highly strange UAP activity. I think Nick brought up some really good subjects. I think consciousness and the interface with UAP is a fascinating idea that maybe ghosts, demons, poltergeists, and aliens and UAP and flying saucers all live in a different realm that poke into our reality, and our limited senses occasionally can perceive them. But the way that we do process the information when we come across something from that other realm tends to be totally subjective in the way that we process what we're seeing. When we see the highly strange, we try and put it into little boxes, when in fact we don't know what it is. That's why it is highly strange. You younger people are so lucky living today in 2025 when these subjects can be talked about openly. Certainly you wouldn't touch a UFO story with a barge pole back in the 80s and 90s when I was being employed by the BBC, or when Nick was aviation editor of Jane's Defence Weekly. It just wasn't done. If you found this discussion interesting, please give me and Nick a big thumbs up. I'll definitely have Nick back as stories develop and we want to talk about more, because the truth needs to be out there.